Retiring Sen. Bob Corker RTN told reporters Wednesday that working on tax reform will make the GOP's recent healthcare struggle look like a piece of cake. Corker explained that a successful tax overhaul is entirely different from simply issuing tax cuts. For CBS News, Corker's biggest issue: there's no way a bill that increases the deficit will pass in Washington, he said, which the new GOP plan might do, noting that he'd never vote for such a bill. There is no reason that Democrats and Republicans in Congress should not come together to deliver this giant win for the American people and begin the middle-class miracle once again, Trump said during today's tax speech. Another key quote: Trump talked about reducing the corporate rate to 20%, which we have previously reported, and he argued, this is a revolutionary change, and the biggest winners will be middle-class workers as jobs start pouring into our country, as companies start competing for American labor, and as wages continue to grow. More from Trump's tax speech: under our framework, we will dramatically cut the business tax rate so that American companies and American workers can beat our foreign competitors and start winning again. We will reduce the corporate tax rate to below the average of other industrialized nations. This will be the lowest top marginal income tax rate for small and mid-sized businesses in more than 80 years. Uber is shutting down its car leasing business, Exchange Leasing, after reportedly hoping to sell it, the company told The Wall Street Journal. The company will look for a less capital-intensive approach, it said. Wyatt Matters debuted 2 years ago. Exchange Leasing has been a controversial business unit. Earlier this summer, the WSJ reported that the company knowingly leased out defective cars to drivers in Singapore, while a Bloomberg report last year explored the financial risks for drivers who rent out the cars. This is one of several moves by the company to shed units that aren't financially viable. Last year, it sold its Chinese operations to local rival Didi Chuxing after sinking $2 billion in the business, and a few months ago it did the same with its operations in Russia and neighboring countries. According to the WSJ, Uber recently discovered that it was losing 18 times more money per vehicle than previously thought. President Trump told reporters he's considering waiving the Jones Act, which aims to protect the shipping industry by only allowing American ships to carry goods and passengers between U.S. ports, but is hesitating because a lot of people that work in the shipping industry don't want the Jones Act lifted. The act was waived for Texas and Florida after Harvey and Irma. Sen. John McCain tweeted that the Trump administration's refusal to waive the act is unacceptable. While the Department of Homeland Security can only waive the act unless there's a threat to the nation, the Department of Defense has an easier way forward, per a WSJ editorial. Sec. James Mattis need only demonstrate that a waiver is necessary in the interest of national defense. About 2,200 federal employees are on the ground in San Juan, including 500 from FEMA, per officials. But communications have been difficult as power lines are down. Still, FEMA said it has been in touch with all 78 mayors in Puerto Rico and distributed satellite phones to some. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is working to survey the damage to Puerto Rico's power grid and roadways and is expected to start installing equipment to bring power back on Wednesday. Per FEMA, the more remote areas of the island are in crisis as rescue crews cannot access them due to blocked roads and threats of landslides. Supplies have been airdropped to these areas. If it's not safe, we cannot send our responders, a FEMA spokeswoman in San Juan told the LA Times. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are being restricted by the White House and the Pentagon from visiting Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands, which have been devastated by Hurricane Maria, on military aircraft, the Washington Post reported. This is to keep full focus and resources on recovery efforts there. At least 10 senators and House members were planning to travel there this weekend, and 2 have already made visits. President Trump plans to visit Puerto Rico himself on Tuesday, and says he's waiting until then to keep the focus on recovery efforts. More from Trump healthcare: Trump said he'll work with Dems and is considering a very major executive order where people can go out across state lines, do lots of things, and buy their own healthcare. He added that it will probably be signed next week. Roy Moore: we have a man who's going to be a great senator. Luther came a long way. Tax reform: Trump would like to start at 15 and get to 20% on corporate tax rate, but the numbers were so low we couldn't take in the revenue. NFL: Trump said it's a very bad box and denied that his remarks contradict the First Amendment. Here are the key new elements. Face ID: as we've written, Apple is taking pains to make sure that the face recognition data stays on the device and can't be accessed by governments or others. To train the neural networks that power Face ID, Apple obtained with informed consent more than 1 billion images of people, including depth and infrared scans. There's more detail in a new page on Apple's website. Differential privacy. Apple is expanding the areas where it collects user data but pledges to anonymize it. Data collected is obfuscated so that Apple cannot confidently guess what contributions an individual user has made. One new area where Apple is collecting such data is around websites, where it is trying to identify websites that often crash or drain the battery. Another thing Apple is exploring is which categories of health data that customers are using but not the actual health data. For example, Apple is collecting whether people are storing heart rate data, but not their actual heart rate. Disabling tracking cookies. One of the moves Apple is making is to offer the ability to block the cookies that track you across multiple websites. It's not an ad blocker, you will still see ads, just not those targeting ones that serve up the same ads for the shoes you looked at once. The bottom line: Apple needs more data to compete in key areas of machine learning and collecting that while preserving privacy requires a lot of creativity and striking a fine balance. Timing: the Republicans' move to roll back the CFPB rule comes a week before Wells Fargo and Equifax executives will testify in court. GOP's thinking: by getting this vote out of the way before the hearings, Republicans can avoid gifting financial companies with forced arbitration clauses while Wells Fargo and Equifax execs get grilled in court. Quotes from Dem leaders. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer: we are simply urging our colleagues to say no to immunity to Wells Fargo, Equifax, or anyone else who does such horrible management deeds. We believe in allowing people to sue. Sen. Elizabeth Warren: forced arbitration clauses are a nasty surprise buried in the fine print that let credit card companies or big banks cheat people and get away with it. And that's wrong. Patrick Leahy: Wells Fargo wouldn't have gone on as long as they did if they thought people could go after them. In the end, the average person and the consumer gets hurt, and the CEO still gets millions in salaries every year. They're not hurt.